But I talked to both Reverend Jackson and to President Obama while I was working on this book about their relationship, because there were a couple things said during the campaign that weren't always so friendly. But it turns out that these things are more complicated than, oh, was he jealous of Barack? It was so much more complicated than that. Let me read a little bit to you about what President Obama told me of the conversation that he had with Jesse Jackson. He said something that's very accurate, Obama told me. He said, Barack, we had to break the door down, which means sometimes you're not polite. You get bloodied up a little bit. You get some scars. You haven't had to go through that, and that's a good thing. That's part of what we went through. I don't expect you to have the same battle scars that I did. So I met all of these people who didn't have the same battle scars as their parents. I met a 28-year-old who's now a state representative in South Carolina, whose father led and was arrested during the Orangeburg massacre in South Carolina. Yet he is now in Congress, in the state house in South Carolina, thinking about running for governor someday. And when he travels the back roads of his state, he doesn't see white or black housing, he sees housing. And he sees that that's his goal. How does he serve his people and not necessarily define himself strictly by race? There are also philosophical differences which have sprung up between the older generation and the current generation. One of them is that, well, among them, is this idea of how one affects change. When you came of age in the 60s, marching was how you affected change, or at least you thought you did. Challenging, court challenges, that's how civil rights laws got passed. Well, okay, so it comes back to Jesse Jackson, because his son is now a member of Congress. And along the way, I realized what we now had was a legacy which was building up. Members of Congress whose children were now taking their seats or broadening out. Jesse Jackson Sr. never held elective office, but Jesse Jackson Jr. does, and he saw the world a little bit differently. So I went to talk to him, and he said to me, he believes there's a continuum of black politics. But while the father thinks back to the arc of a movement that started in the 50s, the son is more focused on saving black folk from the sins of their fathers. There is a movement in the black community toward accountable leadership, he said to me. The paradigm for the unaccountable leaders has radically shifted. I consider very respectfully, and this is for the record, he said, my father to be a part of the unaccountable leadership, even though I completely believe in and trust his mission and his motives for that which he does. But, he continued, the press conference, television visibility, lack of follow-through, everything is a civil rights issue paradigm with leadership is profoundly unaccountable to the masses of people and to history. Now, I was a little taken back, because he clearly came with something on his mind that he needed to share. So I had to go, Reverend Jackson, I have a question for you. And I asked him about what his son had to say. The elder Jackson is keenly aware of his son's apostasy. He said, I encourage in our house vigorous debate, and there is no punishment for a different point of view. We have different roles. Jackson Sr. is the agitator, Jackson Jr. is the negotiator. I would love to spend Thanksgiving at their table.